Why can't US restaurants pay staff a wage instead of them relying on tips? Another thing to consider, most employees don't want things changed either. They make way more per hour this way. Restaurant owners don't want to pay their staff more or raise prices and lose customers. Servers don't want to make less on tips. Most restaurant patrons don't care. So who benefits from the change? We don't have a tipping culture here in Norway, so it seems very weird to me. Could I eat a good meal, get good service, and then choose not to tip? To me it seems that tipping is mandatory, and if you don't tip in the USA then you are a bad person taking the livelihood from the service staff. It seems so absolutely weird to me that if one works in the service industry then you basically have to beg for change from strangers while at the same time working a full-time job. Also, how does it work if business is slow? Do the service staff get compensated if they work a full shift, but only has like 3 customers? Or is it expected that the employee cover the cost of slow business? US tipping culture seems extremely odd and alien to me. The idea that one has to work a full-time job, but still depend on the kindness of strangers seems like a very undignified existence. Employees generally get more money from tips than a flat wage, and they are protected from low tips to some extent since the employer has to make up the difference if it comes in under minimum wage, though that will probably be their last paycheck. The restaurant also brings in more money with tips than without. People will gladly tip 10 on a 40 bill, but scoff at the idea of increasing the price to 50 with no tip, which is what the restaurant would have to do to guarantee they could replace the tips with a higher wage. Why pay your employees when other people do it for you? It definitely sounds weird as an idea, but practically makes a ton of sense. Getting to pay people 3 HR and they willingly work for tips? That's a win for any business. Because the USA managed to pass the buck twice to the consumer. Pay for your meal and then be guilt-tripped to add a mandatory tip to your order. Hell, these days it is rare to not see a tip screen at every purchase you make. The secret is that servers make bank from tips and don't want to give this up. Because they've successfully pawned off that responsibility to the customer in the form of tips, so why change it now? It will only serve to hit their profit margins and then they'll bullshit about how they have to raise prices to recuperate losses, even though every other country in the world manages to do it. If servers don't make at least minimum wage with tips, the employers are legally required to give them minimum anyways. Aside from that, the tipping system helps them make quite a bit of money. It's not uncommon for servers to make at least 30 hour because of tips. Because servers make a lot more in tips than the restaurant would pay them in salary, and because in the past when tips were in cash people making server wages actually owed some income tax, they could skip out on the taxes for those tips. Servers get paid 2.13 per hour. That all gets taken away in taxes. I was a server and bartender for years. I absolutely would not wait tables for an hourly wage. The whole allure is hustling and working your charm, upselling when possible and trying to maximize tips. Most servers share this sentiment. This is why I tip based on service, and I am completely indifferent to the whines and moans of servers. At any point they can quit and go work at McDonald's and get a flat minimum wage. But they want cause, then they can't flirt with old men for tips. No one involved wants it changed. And those of us who do want it changed are so few in numbers we just either accept it or don't participate. Personally, I don't go anywhere it is expected that you tip. I can remember when the standard tip was 12. Now it seems like a fair bit if people consider you an asshole if you don't tip 20-25. Fuck that shit. Tips are not mandatory. It's prevalent because it's allowed. Hold up, to be clear, those employees are paid an hourly wage. Nobody is working for zero. They are making wages tips. However, the legal minimum wage varies and includes variances for employees who receive tips or serve alcohol. The minimum wage can be lower. The restaurants don't pay them more upfront because they don't have to, and it lets them list lower menu prices. That's it. They totally could do those things, and some do, but the incentives are against it. First, yes, profit margins are quite thin at restaurants. Most go out of business within a year of opening. It's very tough to compete in the restaurant industry. Second, most servers like getting paid in tips. My wife used to work at a high-end steakhouse where 2 people might spend $250 or more before alcohol. And if she came home with less than $300 in tips, she considered it a bad night. Now, most servers don't make out quite that well, but a job where people tip well is very desirable. Third, it generally gives you the customer better service. I've been to Europe, and the service at restaurants there was fine, I guess. But even at Michelin star-rated restaurants over there, the service was nothing to write home about. Meanwhile, at a sports bar here in the US, the waiter is refilling my Diet Coke like 5 times, and always checking to see if I need anything. They do pay them through tips. There is no law that forces restaurants to pay a server wage and have a tip system. In fact, no tipping restaurants are a thing. You can Google it. Your city probably has a few, if not several, if you live in a metro area of more than 1 million or so. Yes, profit margins at all restaurants do tend to be thin. Also, Reddit is a huge echo chamber on anti-tipping. Most people don't actually care that much. It's ultimately going to be the same cost one way or another. It's a cultural thing deeply embedded in the US dining industry. Tipping incentivizes servers to provide better service, plus it conveniently shifts the burden of worker compensation from the employer to the customer. The wage model for servers is rooted in tradition and the lobbying power of the restaurant industry. Profit margins are thin, but other countries manage it. It's a mix of economic strategy and old habits dying hard. Just how I feel as an American. Many of us ask the same question. I think it is an old system that needs reform.